Um, Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shvi'is, Yerushalmi Shvi'is, Pedekei, Halacha Beis, and yes, we are moving on today to Halacha Gimel. We are learning Daf Lamed Tes. We left off on Daf Lamed Tes, Amud Aleph Mamish in the top, and let us go quickly back to the Machlokes between Beishamai and Beisilel in the Mishnah. In the Mishnah in Halacha Beis, the Mishnah spoke about three types of vegetables. Number one, Luf Shel Erev Shvi'is. Number two, Bitzolim HaKetzoinim, as we concluded yesterday, explaining the type of onions that are planted in summer, early summer, they are ready at the end of summer, and this pua, which is a plant from which you make a red dye that's planted, Shel Idis, it's planted in very good land, that there's something unique only about these three plants. Number one, we read the Lekute Mishnah Selayo on Daf Lamed Vav, that clearly states, like we spoke out when we learned the Mishnah, that if these products are so readied that they will not increase at all in the ground, and literally all that is needed is for it to be uprooted, that is considered already belonging to that year. So these products were completely finished in the 6th year. All you need to do is to uproot it. The problem with uprooting it is maras ayin, you are digging the ground. Now, I want to add something that we didn't speak out when we learned the Mishnah, and that is, why isn't that issue on all vegetables? In other words, if there is a vegetable that for halachic reasons is a vegetable of the 6th year, so it's not shvi'is, it doesn't have to be given up to be declared ownerless, there's no issues with it vis-a-vis shvi'is. The only problem is marasayin. What makes these three different? So you have to understand that these three are deeply embedded in the ground, to the point that when you dig only these three up, yes, that act of digging up the vegetable could or will resemble plowing. And that's the whole issue between Beishamai and Beisilel. What do you need to do? What type of shinui do you need to do to prevent from that happening? All other vegetables, mamish, are not buried so deep, nor are they embedded so tight. And uprooting them bears absolutely no resemblance with plowing. Remember that. But these three, they bear that resemblance. So Beishamai says, you got to change the tools. B'chlal, you should know that for farmers, you understand this from the Gemara. Changing the implements is already something very difficult. Whatever it is that you do to make a living, if you're used to your implement, right? If you use a PC and you have to use a Mac, you change your implement, it's difficult. But Beishamai says you have to go to a wooden implement, farthest away from implements that are used for plowing. Beisilel says you can use a metal implement, but not the one that's used for plowing. Not the one that's normally used for digging up these three plants either. So the shinui itself is a way that you are showing that you are not plowing the ground. So we're going to have some on this. And the final part of Halacha Beis is the topic of buying produce from a Jew that's chashud ala shvi'is, right after shvi'is, with the fear that he's selling you a product that he wrongfully planted on shvi'is, or that he wrongfully gathered, harvested on shvi'is, that he was not mafker, that he didn't do beer, all of the issues that one has to keep on shvi'is. This Jew is suspect that he does not properly keep shvi'is. Normally, you have the klal of b'chtei sheyaseh, which means that this product can only be bought from the chashud ala shvi'is if there was enough time after shvi'is for this to be planted and harvested. At that point, the majority of that which you buy in the market is from product of after shvi'is, so you can go after the majority. This is called the ruba de leisa kaman. However, Rabbi Yehuda holds that when it comes to the luf, only the luf is different. The luf you can buy right away with the presumption that the luf is of the 6th year, and he only took it out of the ground, matzei shvi'is miyad. And the Gemara is going to want to understand, why is Rabbi Yehuda lenient, maneshtana, the luf, vis-a-vis all the other vegetables. That will be the conclusion of the explanation of the expounding of Halacha Beis, and Halacha Gimel will open up a few new topics. Topic number one is Lifnei Iver. Lifnei Iver lesit and Michshol, whether it also means literal or whether it never means literal is a subject to a machlokes rishonim. It certainly means that we're not allowed to do something, we're not allowed to contribute to someone else's violation of the Torah, even if that other person's violation of the Torah is not because they're blind or because they don't know, it's because sadly, currently, temporarily, they're choosing to do not what God wants. So when you have a person that's chashud ala shvius, and you want to sell to him or to her implements or articles that are used in avodah that may not be done on shvius, so we're going to see exactly what needs to be done. And ultimately, no, you will not be able neither to sell nor to lend articles that are generally used for working the land to a chashud ala shvius. That will be the first topic, lifnei ivit. The other big topic of the Mishnah will be, finally, when it comes to harvesting, when it comes to reaping. So even though the Torah says that sadcha lo siktzor, we keep on mentioning from the beginning, it can't mean you can't harvest at all, you can't reap at all. If not, there would never be paid a shvius. No, it means that you have to reap it in an altered manner. Now, Chavra, I want to say right now, and we'll have to repeat this, there are two foundational machlokes between the Rambam and the Rash. The Rash meaning not the Rash Arilio, but Rabbeinu Shimshon, who wrote a peirush on Mishnayos, printed in all the Mishnayos that we have. The Rambam holds that the shinui means that the quantity of the reaping at one given time has to be diminished. So you have to harvest a much lesser amount. And also when you thresh it, because you only have little amounts, you have to thresh it by hand and not the normal way that you thresh, let's say, the grain that you otherwise harvest in a proper way. That's Shitas Rambam. It's a quantity issue. The Rash holds it's the tools. You have to make a shinui with what type of tools are you using to harvest. Remember that. Next machlokes, huge. The Rambam holds that this restriction of Lerambam, you can only harvest in a diminished amount, is for all of the fields of Shvi'is, no matter how the owner is behaving. The Rash holds that crops that are on fields that the owners left open for all to take as one should, doesn't need to have any shinui. This is very big. When did the Torah say sadcha lo siktzor? Is if it's about a field that the owner did not leave open for all. These are two separate arguments that are very important, and we're going to ultimately see that the halacha lemaisa we rule lehatera, both lerambam and lerash, as we'll speak out when we unpackage the Gemara. Chavre, let's go quickly to Daf Lametes. It's a few minutes late. And moedim bepua tzilois. So the Mishnah said regarding the machlokes Beishamai and Beis Hillel, that Beishamai says regarding those three unique vegetables, you can only use a wooden implement. Beis Hillel says use a unusual, also make a shinui, but use a metal implement. Everyone agrees, meaning Beishamai admits to Beis Hillel that if this type of matter is planted in an area that's called tzilois, that's called a rocky area, Beishamai will not insist that you have to use the ma'arufos shel eitz, right, the spades of wood. No, he will be moida to Beis Hillel that you can even use a unusual metal implement. Now, first of all, the word tzilois has to be interpreted. So the Gemara says tzilois means putra. That's again, this is Greek, means a rocky area. And what's the logic behind it? Because the whole issue of the problem of uprooting these three is that it could resemble plowing. Since people don't cultivate rocky terrain, there will be no marasayin. Gavaldik. Furthermore, v'tanallah, and as we learned in a braysa, and we quoted this yesterday in our introduction, this is a big chiddush, that makim shunahagul achroish, that if you live in a place where on the Shemitah year, it's acceptable for you to plow. Now, plowing stam is never going to be allowed, even if you are plowing in an area where no one plants afterwards. But if there's a purpose of plowing, one of the reasons why you would want to plow is, like we mentioned, these three, the luf shel shvius, and the luf shel erev shvius, and the betzolim hakitzoinim, and pua, these three articles are very deeply embedded in the ground. And when you want to harvest them, one of the ways to do it is to plow. somehow the plowing instruments will not rip it up. It's not going to ruin it. It's going to help you bring it up to the surface for you to be able to harvest it, which is exactly what you want. So we learned in a brayso that if you live in a place where people would be chodesh in a rocky terrain, in order for you to properly harvest this pua, then you are allowed to be acharosh. Or if the way they did it is to do nakesh, they would read it out in a way where nikosh is also usher on shvius. You are improving the land. But again, the problem with improving the land is improving the land in order ultimately to plant food there. If you are in a rocky terrain, people don't cultivate that land, then lechatchila you can do the action of yinakesh on shvius in order to uproot a product of the sixth year. Okay. Now we're moving on to the final topic in the Mishnah, and this is only about the luf, not about the three, but only about the luf. And again, we're speaking about luf that was readied on the sixth year, luf shel erev shviz. That's obviously what we must be talking about. So you are buying luf from a person who's chashad ala shviz, and normally the rule would be, let's say, from when you plant the luf until when it's ready, it takes 5 months or 4 months or whatever the time is. Then the rule would be you can only buy luf from a chashad ala shvius after you wait those couple of months. But Rabbi Yehuda doesn't say that. Rabbi Yehuda says that you are allowed to buy luf from a chashad ala shvius miyad. The chachamim are the ones that say that mishayirbe hechadosh. Mishayirbe hechadosh means from when, like we mentioned, the majority of the lufs in the market are from the new cultivation. Only from them can you buy from the chashad ala shvius. The sheet of the chachamim is self-explanatory, of course. But the question is, my Talmud Rabbi Yehuda, and actually there's a Mishnah that writes befedish on our daf nun that you are only allowed to buy vegetables from a chashad ala shvius once that same type is already in the marketplace. That type that was planted after shvius is found in the market. So why is luf different? Look inside the maraful, the 10 lines from the top. My time in Rabbi Yehuda, lo mehitir beluf miyad. However, ubiyerek. But regarding all other vegetables, as we'll have in Perek Shishi in the next chapter, loy polig ad rabbanon, who say, everyone says the asri, at sheyase kayoytze bohen. That's the Gemara's kasha. So here comes the answer that since Gozru ala luf, since we learned that luf that is from the sixth year, because it's completed, and we learned also yesterday that it takes a few years for it to grow. So we must be speaking about a luf that was planted many years before Shvius. At some point, that's it. That's the end of the story over here. That's the luf that belongs to the sixth year. It's in the ground, but all you need is to uproot it. Nevertheless, we just learned that since it could appear as if you are plowing, and that's something unique to the luf and the other two, but we're going to focus now on the luf. So even lebeis Hillel, you can't use your normal metal spade. Means even though beis Hillel is not so machmer like beis Shammai, but you got to make a shinoi. It's very uncomfortable for people to use an implement that they are not familiar with, that they don't usually use in avodas hakarka. It doesn't work that way. And therefore, there's a greater logic to say that this Jew that's chashad ala shvius had luf in the ground on shvius. And another thing you see there's so many nuances, that even a person who's chashad ala shvius would not openly violate shvius. He would not do it. Whatever he would do when people don't catch him red-handed. So for him to harvest the luf, even of erev shvius, on shvius, even the chashad ala shvius would limit himself to use a implement that's not comfortable for him to use, which would be a reason why he wouldn't do anything. He would say, why should I uproot it in a way that's difficult? Let me wait until after Shvius, and I'll uproot it after Shvius right away. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda says there's a higher chance that the luf that you are buying from this chashad ala Shvius right after Shvius is really from the sixth year. Because everyone would prefer to leave it in the ground versus using this implement that makes it harder to harvest. And that's such when it comes to other vegetables. So other vegetables are allowed to be uprooted in a normal manner. There's no need for a shinoi. The shinoi is only for the three mentioned in the Mishnah. This is how they are different. This is quite amazing. All right. Now, me'ato frekti gemara, if that's the case, the Mishnah only spoke about buying the luf from a chashud, matzoi shvis. Why would we not be allowed to buy the luf? Because it must be that whatever it is that he's selling on shvis, he already uprooted on the 6th year. You're telling me that people don't like assume that this luf that he's selling on shvis is luf that he actually uprooted on the 6th year. You should always be allowed to buy luf even from the chashud ala shvis. So answers the Gemara, betamun anan kaimen. This is important. That when are we saying that when you buy something from a Yamaretz, you are allowed to rely on the logic? Ooh, it was hard for him to uproot the luf on shvi'is, so therefore it makes sense that he left it in the ground and he only uprooted it right after shvi'is. Because he would not go through the trouble harvesting luf in an unusual manner. When if he is not going to uproot in an unusual manner, for him to sell it later. Look at this as a psychological answer. People don't work extra hard if whatever profit they will get from their work will only be a later profit. People are also lazy. So they say, you know what? If anyways my profit will only come later, let me work later when the working later will be easier. But if a person wants to make profit right away, which is if he were to be selling the luf on shvi'is, then it could be that he will go through the extra trouble of uprooting the luf in an unusual manner. But what type of luf is he uprooting? The luf of the 7th year. He's a chashud ala shvi'is. And you're not allowed to buy product of the 7th year. Can't do schayda with it. That's why on shvi'is, we have to have a chshad that he did something harder because he wants to make it avach right now. But what we said before is that the Am Ha'aretz will not uproot a product of shvi'is only to sell it later. That he won't do. Because uprooting the product on shvi'is demands for him to do it in an unusual manner. You don't want to work in an unusual manner. This is really great. Now, by the way, if it's already at the end, even if it's at the end of the 7th year, Rabbi Yehuda says miyad, even if it's at the end of the 7th year, that means he's uprooting it to sell it relatively right away. Even there, he will not uproot it on the 7th year. Because he'll tell himself, I'm selling it in 2-3 days. Let me already do the work in 2-3 days. But on the 7th year proper, where it's a whole year, yes, there we are a chashud ala shvi'is, to do something a little bit more difficult for him to make profit that year. That's something that he will do. This is really great. So all of this is explaining the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. However, the Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, and they hold that what? That no, how do you know that? Maybe, yeah, like we said, the chashud ala shvi'is in public won't do something that everyone will see is in violation of rabbinic law. Fine. But maybe the product that he is selling to you right now, he uprooted on the 7th year, and it is a product of the 7th year. That's the shita of Chachamim. So what do you need to do? Like you have to do, like we learned, like we just quoted in the Marafulda from Perek Shishi, that at sheyatze chayoytze bahen, or we have, as we have in the words of the Mishnah, misheyirbe hechodosh. So Tani says the Gemara, we learned in the Braisa, Amar Rabbi Yehuda proving from a story, his shita that you can buy it miyad. Ma'aseh shoyino be ein kushin. Ein kushin is the name of a place, and v'yochalnu luf. We're speaking obviously about luf that was purchased from a chashud ala shvi'is right after shvi'is. Chodesh Tishrei, we bought it. Al pi Rabbi Tarfon. And when was that? B'Mitzvah HaChag, right after Sukkot. Right? So that's Anaya, Shel Mitzvah Shvis. In other words, you see from what happened that my Shita is the right Shita. Amalai Rabbi Yoisa, that Imcha Hayisi, I was with you, and you got the month wrong. And V'lo Yehoya Ela Mitzvah Pesach. And by Pesach, by that time, guys, there was an abundance of the new luv crop. So it's a very interesting brisa where you have a Tana Rabbi Yehuda. I mean, the story happened. So here you see that stories, people are not going to make up a story. It's a Ma'aser Shahaya. But even the Pshat, but people can forget the date of the story, and the date is that which is important over here. That's something that we say it's possible. When did the story happen? It was after Yom Tov. People remember after Yom Tov. The question is, what Yom Tov? You remembered after Sukkot when it was after Pesach. Okay. We have to make a mini siyum with the topic of the luf. And now we are starting, like we mentioned, a Mishnah that has in it two huge topics. The first one is Lifnei Iver, and the other one is connected to the prohibition in the Torah of harvesting crops in a usual manner. Again, we're going to repeat the Machlokes and Rambam and the Rash because it's very important, both arguments. But let's begin with first Lifnei Iver. So says the Mishnah. The hemshech of the Mishnayos is about chashad al hashvis. It's halacha beis just finished with buying something from a chashad al hashvis, or about the luf. So says the Mishnah that elu kelim, the following farming implements are such she'ein ha'uman rishoi lemoichron b'shvi'is, that a craftsman is not allowed to sell. And obviously the Gemara will explain to whom can you not sell. And yes, we are speaking about a chashad al hashvis. Why? Because lifnei iver le'sitin michshel. And I do want to remind everyone that there is a machlokes rishonim. How far do you apply the lifnei iver le'sitin michshel? There's really two arguments. One argument is whether lifnei iver also means kepshutai. And that's a very big argument because Chazal tell us that ein mikra yotzei midei pshutai. And even though we have an exception, the exception that the Gemara gives is from Parshas Kiseitze, from the law of Yibum. Clear. I'm forgetting the detail, but there's some statement in the pasuk of Yibum which is Yotzei Midei Pshutai. Is that the only exception? According to many Rishonim, Lifnei Iver Le'sitim Michshel doesn't even mean the pshat. That means if someone were to, God forbid, put a stumbling block in front of the blind and the blind trips, he did a horrible thing, he won't get malchus. Other Rishonim say it means kipshutai, and it also means not to accommodate or not to somehow participate or not to help a violator do his violation. Now here also, you have a machlokes Rishonim ad until how far? And Tosfos holds, explaining the words of the Gemara, that lifnei iver le'sitim michshel is only when it's betrei ivra denara, which means that if the violator is in a place where he will not be able to violate without you selling him, say a person is not yet eating kosher. He's in a location where he does not have not kosher. If you sell to him non-kosher food, and he's claiming, he's buying it to sell it, which by the way, midrabanan, you can't do either. But just this idea. Then you say, lifnei iver le'sitim michshel, because if not for you, he will not be able to do it. If he will be able to violate regardless, then according to many Rishonim, it's not asur mitzad lifnei iver, but it's asur midrabanan. It's called you're being misayeya lo'ovrei avera. According to the Rambam, the way I understand the Rambam makes no such difference. That even if the person will be able to violate without you, if you are somehow, like in our case, you're selling an implement, a farming implement, to a person who's chashud to working the land on Shvi'is, you're over lifnei iver le'sitim michshel. If he won't buy it from you, he'll buy it from someone else. Doesn't matter. But lifnei iver le'sitim michshel, you're not allowed to sell it to him. So what may you not sell? Because these are articles that are used for working the land. Macharesha v'chol keleo, a plow and all of the accessories of a plow. Ha'oil, a yoke. V'hamizra, Kevin is happy with the pictures, a winnowing fork. And v'hadeker, and a hole. Because the sole function, that's the key. These articles are used for activities that may not be done on Shvi'is, and therefore you can't give it you can't sell it to the chashad ala shvius. Now, this really has to be unpackaged a little bit more.
You said it conditionally?
No, you cannot. You don't trust him. He's untrustworthy because he's chashad ala shvius. Now, we just spoke out. Let's chaz it again. The Rambam holds that the isur of gathering product on shvius is whether the person was mafkid or not mafkid, his field. And whatever you do, you have to do it in a diminished manner. The Rash holds that you have to use unusual implements. He doesn't speak about the quantity of, but when you harvest, use, like we learned before in the previous Mishnah, use an implement that's uncomfortable for the farmer. It's like a reminder. Mistama, you're going to do less because the implement is not good. But the Rash has a very big chiddush. The Rash holds that that's only needed from a field that was not left hefker. If the owner did the right thing on Shvius and was mafkid his field, that means he opened up his field for everyone to get the product, including himself, but everyone equally, then you need not make any such shinui. So the kasha will be, the Rash says in the Mishnah, according to the Rash, why are we saying that you're being over on lifnei iver by selling these implements, let's say a winnowing fork? Mela the Rambam, a winnowing fork is only needed if you harvested a lot. Then you need a fork to winnow. You never, according to the Rambam, you're never allowed to harvest a lot. According to the Rash, first of all, you can harvest a lot with the shinui. Second of all, if the owner of the field left his field mufkar, you can do everything kedarkoi. So why will the mizra be something that's asur? So it's a raya. The Rash himself says that even according to the Rash, there is a limit of how much you can harvest. There is a limit. And basically, to harvest, for you to store, harvesting such quantities that it's not shaykh for you to eat it now and share it with your people, but you're doing it for storage, that's something even larash that it must be asur. When do you need to have a fork to winnow? When you have these types of quantities. This is very important. Okay, so that's number one. Chava, turning to daf lamed tesamid base. Now, we're still learning the sugi of lifnei iver. When it comes to selling him a magal yod, a hand sickle, or a magal katzir, a reaping sickle, or va'agola, a wagon and all its accessories. In other words, these are articles that are needed even when you harvest a small amount. So that now the chashud ala shvius, we know this person won't necessarily do it the right way. Doesn't matter. But the article that you are selling to him are used by people that are properly keeping the Shemitah. So here you are allowed to sell it to him. Here we don't say, "Ooh, he's a chashud ala shvius, you can't do any business with him." And as the Mishnah concludes by giving you the klal, Zajac klal, kol shemalachto miyuchedes, any implement that's only used, it's only used for a malacha that may not be done on shvius, la'avoidasoi, then it's asur. But if the implement that you're selling is both used le'isur u'leheter, gavaldik, then it's muter. Clear. The aveda of lifnei iver applies only when the object is one that will certainly be used for a sin. If the object that you are selling might be used for a sin, but its regular use is also for something that's muter, there is bechlal no isur. We don't say, it's isur d'oraisa, you have like a suffix.
Is there a time limit? How long before or after you can sell it to him?
That's a good question. Afterwards, for sure, right away.
Right.
The question is before. Do we say that if you can use it for one day is good? Maybe. I don't know.
Like Pesach rules, shopping from products from a store that didn't keep.
Oh, no. That's not shaykh here. But just this idea of le'isur leheter is why we find this by muktzah, right? Kelish malachte le'isur leheter. Okay, coming over here. Now, okay, let's continue to learn lifnei iver. But the first topic about the hand sickle and the ripping sickle, that takes us back to the machlokas between the Rambam and the Rash. Remember both arguments over here, and we're going to need them. We're going to need them when we unpackage the sugya. Now, speaking about the quantities, here again, L'Rambam, everything will be easy. L'Rambam, the quantities always are limited. Always are limited. L'Rash, even though, like we mentioned, the Rash never speaks about quantities, he only demands for you to change the implement, but only from fields that are not mufkar. It must be from the winnowing fork that Rash himself says that even according to him, there is a limit to how much you can harvest on Shvis. And now let's apply this to wine and to oil. We're not speaking about implements that are used to harvest the olives and the grapes, but we're speaking about barrels that are used to store the oil and the wine that people produce from the olives and the grapes. Being that there is a limit of quantity, even l'rash, so it goes according to everyone, what is the normal amount of grapes or olives that people will harvest, beheted, on Shvi'is? How many barrels do you need for that? More than that quantity of barrels, of empty barrels, you may not sell the chashud ala shvi'is. Guys, don't forget, everything in the Mishnah is only regarding someone who's chashud ala shvi'is, because if someone is not chashud ala shvi'is, there's a good deal right now. He'll use the barrels in the 8th year. He'll use the barrels matzeh shvi'is. Says the Mishnah. Hayotzir, a potter, he's making his living by selling jugs. Moicher chamesh kadei shemen, he's allowed to sell to a chashud ala shvi'is up to and including 5 oil jugs and 15 wine jugs. They correspond to each other. Why? The amount that you can bring of oil and of wine is enough to fill up this quantity of jugs. The jugs had a standard size, and like Kevin put on the picture, as we'll see in the Gemara, these were all earthenware jugs. Okay, and that will be of importance, and not only that, but the type of jug that was used for oil was different than the type of jug that was used for wine. Because if not, the kasha the Gemara is going to say is, the guy can be telling you, I'm buying 15 jugs for wine, and he can use it for oil. You're not allowed to sell him more than 5 for oil. We'll see these are 2 different products. Now, im hevi yoiser mikain, if the customer bought more than that amount of jugs, I take that back. If the customer brought home more than this amount of oil and wine, he's telling you, no, I don't need 5 jugs. I already have in my house harvested olives for 6 jugs. So says the Mishnah, if he already has amounts that demand more jugs, mutter. There's a machlokes what mutter means. Either mutter means you can sell him, now that he already has the product, you can sell him the amount of jugs that he needs.
Wait, why do we trust what he says?
Because what he's saying the whole time is that the olives and the grapes were gathered by Oifen HaMutter. Could be he gathered it from 2 different fields. Could be he's claiming that some of them were from last year. He's coming with a story to you that we're not allowed to trust him. Other opinions understand. You know what mutter means? Mutter means you can still sell him the 5. You can never sell him more than 5. You can never sell him more than 15 for the wine. Elama, this guy is saying, hold on, what do you mean 15? I happen to have grapes. I need 16. So you might have thought, you have 16. Is that ayah that you violated Shvi'is? If you violated Shvi'is, maybe I should not be allowed to sell you not a single jug. Kumash Malon, the quantities of jugs can be sold to you, even if he has more than what you are providing with him, which implies he did something asur. And Kevin, implying means that could be there's a way he did it beheted, but the standard would be he did it be'ofen ha'asur. Next in, all of these restrictions is to sell it to a Jew that's currently chashud ala shvi'is. The seller and the buyer are both in the Holy Land. If this potter, that's your business. You sell jugs. There are no limits to how much or how little you can sell to a goy. And there's a chiddush. Why? Because one might say, if I'm going to sell it to a goy, then the goy might sell it to a Jew that's chassid ala shvi'is. I don't have to be concerned from that. And similarly, I don't have any limit if I'm selling it to a Yid, to a Yisrael that lives in Chutz La'aretz, in which there's no limitations of shvi'is at all. Dinei shvi'is is only noyig ba'aretz. And again, the chiddush is that we're not choshid that the Jew who lives b'chul will come to the Holy Land and sell it to Jews that are choshid al hashvius. We don't go ad kedei kach. Now let's go further. Says the Mishnah, guys, this is going to lead us into a topic that we have in Bava Mitzia. Right, when people buy cows, there are two functions for cows. Number one is leradia. Remember that? Leradia means for plowing, for working. And the other is to eat it. And there's a roiv people buy it. So here we go. If cows are used for plowing, one is not allowed to plow on Shvis. So the question is, am I allowed to sell a cow to a chashud ala Shvis on the Shemitah year?
But the plowing cows look different than regular cows. They're
we're going to speak more about that tomorrow. That's exactly the point. The Gemara, we learned about this already many years ago. On the Bavli, we're going to have a parallel to Zarav, and there's a Shmuel. In other words, a lot of the shitas that we learned over there, maybe we'll have tomorrow. We're going to pull out a Gemara Bavli, and we're going to compare how it's worded there and here. I didn't get that far yet. But let's go. However, Beis Hillel are matirim. Why? Because even though right, the cow looks different, but that, in other words, a cow for eating, let's say, is less valuable. Cow that still has koyach for plowing doesn't matter, but you can eat up that plowing cow. Especially, I don't think these Tanoim were so megushim. Today, people know this cow is more muscular, and it's less muscular, and it's more tender. The Gabbai is going to have a lot to say on this. What do they care? You're hungry. You have a shtickle protein. If it's kosher, you go eat protein. So you can eat it up. And no, the chiddush of Beis Hillel is that even though it's unlikely, you can assume their intention, because we're going to get later into. Kevin, I want to touch to what you said. If you asked him a question and he gave a response, that can change everything. Even though, again, he's not trustworthy. But let's speak about a scenario where nothing was spoken. It was stam. So there are certain presumptions. Beis Hillel says, let's go with the simple, that even though most people will buy this type of cow, leradia, they'll buy this type of cow for plowing, I am allowed to assume that he's buying it to eat. Oh, next, another din, don't forget that all produce could be sold. Even shvi'is, we're learning new dinim today. Even shvi'is product, obviously that was harvested kedin, could be sold in the amount of 3 meals. Even though the monies that you are getting will also be imbued with kedusha shvi'is. Let me just open up this topic. So again, says the Mishnah, the peiros that we are speaking about is either non-shvi'is peiros, or we're speaking about the amount of shvi'is peiros that is allowed to be sold, which is mazen gimel su'udais, b'shas hazera during the planting season. Here again, because the produce that the person is buying, the chashad al shvi'is, can be used for two things. We're talking about grain. I can plant the grain, I can eat the grain. So when I'm selling it to the chashad al shvi'is, like Beis Hillel, I can assume that the buyer is buying it to eat. Furthermore, so you have this measure utensil that is called a sa'a measure. And what's the issue with that? One is not allowed to store peiroi shvi'is. When people would put food then in storage, it would be important for them to know how much food they're putting away. So one of the usages of this measuring cup, this measuring utensil of a saw was, I need it if I want to store. How many saw am I storing? All right. A saw can be used when you're preparing food. A saw can be used even when you're eating the food. I don't know. It has a dual purpose. So again, Beis Hillel is saying that you are allowed to lend to him your measure of a saw, even though that you know this person has a threshing floor, and you know that he has quantities that he's not allowed to have. And if he's going to store it, he's going to make benefit from the borrowed saw. I don't have to be concerned with that, because the saw is also used when you're eating. You're making a challah. You want to be mafresh challah. You want to know if you have your 5 pounds. People measure when they're eating. Now, another din. Even though this person has workers that are working for him on Shvi'is, and you have Ma'a is a larger denomination, a Pruta is the smaller denomination, right? Dollars and Chvei cents, you are allowed to exchange larger denominations to smaller denominations, which is something that people with workers would need. They sell on the market, they gather bigger bills. They have to pay their workers, they have to pay them smaller numbers. So you would argue, I'm not allowed to do it because lifnei iver. You are allowed to do it because even many times you need to have an exchange of a larger denomination to a smaller denomination, independent of you paying your workers. All of the above is when the chashud ala shvius is not telling you his intention. I think even if he's telling you a kosher intention, he's untrustworthy. But if he befedish tells you that I'm using it for paying my workers, I need your saw because I have to store the product. I need the cow. I want to buy the cow because I want to plow. V'kulam befedish asurim gevaldik. We have 2 more minutes. Let's go until the end of the Amid. So says the Gemara. Elu kalim. So says the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yoina. Kaina masnisam. You have to understand. The Mishnah didn't say to whom you can't sell it. But it must be Elu Kalim She'ein Ha'uman Ashrelim Achram Shvi'is. To whom add the words L'chashad Ala Shvi'is. Now Gemara has a Gvaldik question. What happens if there's a Jew that you don't know what his current religious commitment, observance is? You don't know where the person is at. Staman. You don't know if he's chashad or not. So do you have to lean on the side of he might be chashad? Or do you have to lean on the side of that he's chashud? Right? We Hasidim, we don't even understand the kasha. But actually, that's a Gemara. The Gemara gives a beautiful Talmudic answer that you have to give the person the benefit of the doubt. What's the raya? The Mishnah itself spoke about utensils. If you have a utensil that is l'isur leheter, so what did the Mishnah say? There's no restriction. So if you look at a keli, if a keli could be used l'isur leheter, I'm allowed to transact deals kelim. Why? Because who says he'll do it l'isur, he'll do it leheter? So why should a person be worse than a keli? Mam min man detani l'isur leheter muter. So if by the keli this is gavaldik, same for the keli, same for the person. Hada amra staman mutar. Let's have another couple of lines. The potter may sell. Why are we not afraid, like we mentioned when we learned the Mishnah, that the person is going to purchase 15 jugs for oil? He's going to tell the seller, I'm buying it for wine. They are shaped differently. Another answer, Idra the ilan chakima, the idra the ilan chakima. Now, the leather is just a shem hamushal, because we're speaking about earthenware jugs, but that's an expression. That leather doesn't all look the same. The leather of these are recognizable. The leathers of those are recognizable, meaning that the clay has a distinct appearance, independent of the shape. And finally, another understanding in Rabbi Ulam, another understanding of Rabbi Ula is that these yotzrim are not selling you new utensils. They're selling you used utensils. That's the whole topic of the sherry cask. And if a jug, an earthenware jug that we know from Hilchas Kashrus, it's boileya and it's not fully poilet, if it was used for oil, you're not going to store wine in it. It's going to ruin it. If it was previously stored for wine, you're not going to store oil in it. Because the beliyos in the walls of the keli will affect the tam of the contents that are put in the keli. We have this word of a Hasidic bendel, which means that if we were merited to have parents that put in our bones some alachluchias as it should be, that takes the advantage that when you go off the way, whatever you do won't even taste good anymore.